So today we're going to go over the National Steering Committee guidelines. And before we jump into it, I want to introduce myself and kind of what our goal is here. So my name is Jenna McWhirter, and I am the current chair for the Education Subcommittee for the National Small Business Environmental Assistance Program. The Education Subcommittee's purpose is to identify common program questions and find or create resources that can be shared with the national program. And we're going to be trying something a little bit different than what we've done in the past. During our last subcommittee meeting, we had discussed doing more short 30-minute presentations for the main SBEEP network. And then once a quarter, we'll be doing kind of longer 1-hour discussion sessions with subcommittee members only. So if you'd like to join the subcommittee discussions, please let me know so we can get you added to the listserv. Also, Derek Bozell is currently the co-chair of the Education Subcommittee. But since he'll be stepping into the vice chair role for the National Steering Committee, the Education Subcommittee may be looking for a new co-chair in the near future. So if you'd like to get more involved with the National Steering Committee and National Network, that would be a great opportunity to do so. And before I start with our presentation, the session is going to be recorded and then uploaded to the National SBEEP YouTube channel. If you want a link to that, please let me know and I can provide that for you guys. And also Donovan is being a champ and helping me monitor the chat and is here to provide some support if there are questions for anything. I'm a newbie when it comes to the guidelines. So Donovan, I bet, knows them better than the back of his hand. So he'll be helping us on that. So today we're going to go over the National Steering Committee guidelines. We'll go over why they're important and how they're implemented. And the reason I wanted to do this as an informational session was that unless you're serving on the National Steering Committee, you might not know about the guidelines. And they're really important because they help keep our national program coordinated, cohesive, and consistent. So without further ado, let's jump into this slide deck. So in 1990, as y'all all know, the 507 programs were established. And in 1995, the National Steering Committee was created. And it was created because a steering committee helps decide on priorities or order of business for an organization. It also manages kind of the general course of the National SBEEP operations. So, and it was created to be a support for the national network of state SBEEPs. The National Steering Committee also provides a channel of communication between state programs and the EPA and their various programs, and identifies and resolves common problems faced by the 507 programs or the SBEEPs. So the National Steering Committee also identifies inconsistent guidance across regions, helps states respond to complex or emerging regulatory issues, and coordinates outreach materials. So then in 2000, the guidelines for the National Steering Committee were finalized. The guidelines spell out the purpose of having a steering committee, who makes up the voting body of the committee, and establishes the term limits and a timeline of the National Steering Committee roles. Since 2000, it was revised and updated in 2007, 2010, and in 2025. And as I mentioned up front, the guidelines were and are important because it helps establish network coordination, consistency, and cohesiveness. So who makes up the steering committee? So that's the chair, the vice chair, and then the regional representatives and their alternate, and subcommittee chairs. And we'll go into each of these different positions. So the chair is the National SBEEP Advocate. They are also the liaison with EPA and external partners, and they also schedule the monthly National Steering Committee meetings. The vice chair provides support and backup for the chair. So they jointly represent the network with the chair. And so this role is really important. If the chair can't go attend something or be the voice, the vice chair can step in and provide that support. Next on our list is the regional representatives and their alternates. So regional representatives and alternates represent their regions. The regions are divided into the 10 different EPA regions. And so, for example, since Donovan is my help today, I'm going to use him as an example. He is the chair right now for the Southeast region, or this region 4. And so he's from Tennessee, and then we have Shannon, who's in Kentucky, is the alternate for that region. So each region has their own representative and alternate. And the reason why they're super important, and in my personal opinion, kind of the most valuable members here, is that they not only communicate with the National Steering Committee, but they also can communicate with the local programs. So it's essentially they're kind of the glue that holds the steering committee together with our local programs. And last but surely not least is the subcommittee chairs. So the subcommittee chairs, they relay information to the National Steering Committee members about what's going on in their particular subcommittees. And right now we have a bunch of different subcommittees. These include the metrics, annual training, education, promotions, website, and just a little note here that is mentioned in the guidelines that only the National Steering Committee has the authority to create or discontinue the subcommittees, and they will only be created or discontinued by a majority vote. So just a little note there about our subcommittees. And next, we're going to talk about the terms. So the chair for the National Steering Committee serves for 2 years, starting on June 1st of an election year. And after they serve that 2 years, they are serving in kind of an advisory capacity for about a year to support the new chair and vice chair. And then the vice chair also does 2 years of an election year. And then after those 2 years, they will then roll into that chair role and serve for 2 years. It's kind of similar situation with the regional representatives. They serve for 2 years, and then the alternates serve 2 years and then assume the role for the regional representative. So you can kind of see how the vice chair and chair situation and the regional representatives and alternates is kind of similar in that 2 year and then rolling into the kind of elevated position. And then it doesn't actually talk about the subcommittee chairs, but I think a lot of the subcommittee chairs kind of do a similar situation, serving those 2 years. So just a note for that. And then how are these elections done for the vice chair? So it's the vice chair is the only position that's elected since that position gets then rolled into the chair position. So what typically happens, and it may not always be like this because they are guidelines, but in February, typically what happens is that the National Steering Committee will solicit interest for whoever wants to fill that role for vice chair. In March of the same year, individuals interested in that vice chair role must notify the chair. And then in April, if there are multiple candidates, those candidates must write letters of interest, letting the chair know that they are really interested in the position. And then from there, if there are multiple candidates, the regional representatives would then distribute those letters of interest to their respective regions. Then they would gather votes from the state programs in those regions. And for the voting, each state program, if the ombudsman and the technical assistance program director are both serving the same role in the state, those votes get counted twice. So if you have two separate entities, they could have separate or different votes. But if you have just one person serving in your state as the ombudsman or the technical assistance program, that state's vote is counted twice. And then from there, everybody submits their votes. The votes get submitted to the chair. And then the individual with the greatest number of votes is elected. Who attends these meetings for the National Steering Committee? Well, one thing I wanted to point out is it does say that it's open to any interested state small business ombudsman and or representative of state technical assistance programs. It said explicitly in the guidelines that an open collaborative group that fosters the sharing of ideas and keeps communications open is one that functions best to advance the collective good. So I really thought that was important to share, that the guidelines are very explicit that everybody's information and ideas are welcome in the meetings. And on top of that, the voting members for the National Steering Committee are the chair, the vice chair, the regional representative, or their alternate. So for example, if a regional rep couldn't be there for a voting issue, the alternate kind of serves as their stand-in for that vote. And then the non-voting members of the National Steering Committee include subcommittee chairs and other programs. So as I mentioned before, all of those programs that are interested in attending those meetings, they would be non-voting members. And then, so we'll now transition to talk about voting. So if there are no impacts to the national network, if it's like an issue that really isn't going to impact anybody else besides the National Steering Committee, that is determined by a majority vote, and that is determined by the chair, vice chair, and the regional rep or alternate. Now, if the voting is on an issue that is going to impact the national network, it needs to be determined by majority vote by all of the programs. So how we do that is the chair will prepare a statement on the issue describing what's going on, why there's an issue, and why it's being voted on. And then the regional representatives then share that with their region. So kind of similar to the election kind of voting procedures go on here. So the regional reps share that with their regions. They get the vote within the region, and then the regional rep submits it to the chair. The chair determines the cumulative vote of all the regions, and then that majority vote wins or is passed through. So like I mentioned earlier, for the elections, each state is allowed 2 votes, one for the state ombudsman and one for the technical assistance program director. If there's one person serving as both roles, their vote is counted twice. So what happens if a majority is not reached? So the chair will then inform the National Steering Committee that a majority hasn't been reached. The regional representatives will inform the region and then allow them for space to submit comments or share what their position on the issue is. And then that info is then passed to the chair. And the chair presents the views in an unbiased manner to the National Steering Committee and to the party that originated that issue. And then a chair may call another vote and it would proceed as we just covered. And a note on the majority and majority vote. While a majority may be established on an issue, this doesn't preclude any individual state program from having or publicly taking a stand contrary to the position of the majority. And any vested state interest can't be eclipsed or have its viability determined or impaired by the National Steering Committee majority. And any states may present its view directly to the National Steering Committee during appropriate calls or meetings. And I believe this is kind of the last note in the guidelines themselves. And I felt like that was important to show, like, no matter what happens with the network, you know, you represent your state, and whatever your state program or small business program needs to do, you know, that's not going to get eclipsed by the National Steering Committee. And with that, I think I breezed through that, which is a-okay with me. That is the concluding slide for our Education Subcommittee on the National Steering Committee. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and open the floor for any questions if anybody has any, and if not, that is okay.
So Jenna, this is Donovan. One thing saw that you overlooked on the is the eligibility for the chair and vice chair.
Absolutely. Please tell us about
have
that.
to have at least been a regional representative or subcommittee chair to be eligible for the vice chair or chair position. So and typically, yes, the vice chair is the one voted upon, and then they move into the chair position. This year was a little bit unusual in that Lucy was not able to step into the chair position, and that is why we had both Jeremy and Derek moving into new positions this year. So there's that. Anthony is asking about a YouTube address for this recording.
Yeah, so Anthony, the recording, after we get done with this meeting, I gotta edit the recording a little bit and then send it to Lena so she can post it to the YouTube page. So once that's done, and I will send that link after it's posted on YouTube to the main listserv.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course.
This should be the general National SBIP YouTube where it should occur.
Yes, thank you, Donovan.
Yes, thank you.
And I think what they've done on there too is kind of split it up by like education or like by topic kind of. So that's helpful to look through those videos.
One of the other things I'll note is when necessary, a person may be in multiple positions in the NSC. It sometimes gets a little ridiculous, but for example, at one point I was both the vice chair, co-chair of technical, and the regional representative. But when I moved on up to the chair, I stepped away from the subcommittee. But there are plenty of opportunities, and we love for people to step up and be willing to be regional representatives, work with co-chairs, or eventually become vice chair and chair of the National Steering Committee. In some ways, this gives you a leadership opportunity outside of potentially your own work. Because, of course, in our own state jobs, getting a leadership position may actually entail getting a new position as a manager, or there's a whole hiring process and such as that. This at least gives you an opportunity outside of those parameters. And honestly, if you are looking for a manager position, this is one way to really add a nice feather to your cap that people will look at. It's like, hey, you were part of a national group, or you led an entire region. So definitely, that's one way to really help. And if nothing else, if you do personal evaluations, being part of that and taking an active role is another great way to show your leadership skills.
For sure. And thank you for throwing the information about serving in multiple roles. I don't think that's explicitly said anywhere in the guidelines, but yeah, as Donovan said, there's a lot of roles that need to be filled, and everybody needs a little bit of support. So anytime someone can step into a role, it's really helpful, and always really good to get different people's perspectives, especially since we're spread out across the country.
And sometimes the only reason somebody should be in multiple roles is they can't convince somebody else to step into it. So as Jen said, the roles need to be filled, and we'll fill them somehow. Preferably with individuals wanting to be there and able to focus on that role. But if necessary, some of us that feel that they have the bandwidth may assume multiple roles as a last resort. That's sort of what I will say on that.